Okay, good morning.
Good morning.
We are going to go back 32 years, partly because it's a presidential election this year, and there was one moment during the 1992 debate that kind of defined the problem for George W. Bush, or H.W. Bush, which I'll talk about. But on January 1st, there was a new country. It was called Russia. The presidential debate took place. There were a couple of them, and George H.W. Bush had a problem with one of them. The Rodney King trial took place in Los Angeles. The weathermen are talking about a major hurricane perhaps hitting Florida or Alabama next week. Well, that was Hurricane Andrew back in 1992. How many of you like going shopping to a mall? Not too many of you. Well, the biggest mall ever built opened in 1992 in Bloomington, Minnesota. It was called the Mall of America. And Knott's Berry Farm, or Knott's had a had an amusement park in there, the Knott's Berry Farm people. The North American Free Trade Agreement took place in 1992. Slovakia splits from Czechoslovakia, and now you have two countries, the Czech Republic and Slovakia. Rabin returns as the Israeli Prime Minister. The end of apartheid in South Africa is near. The Cartoon Network starts. Anybody watch cartoons besides me? I'm the only one? I watch cartoons all the time. Great entertainment, particularly Warner Brothers. And the Great Piggyback Robbery with Daffy Duck is one of my favorites. National Hockey League players went on strike. We say goodbye to Johnny Carson. How many of you used to go to bed with Johnny Carson? Was he good in bed? So he was good in bed? He satisfy you in bed? How many of you didn't watch him in bed? You watched him standing up on the couch. Anyway, he says goodbye. Bette Midler was the last guest, and Howard Cosell, who I knew, and for whatever reason, we were friendly. He gives it up in 1992. I'm still friendly with three of his grandsons. Mike Tyson is convicted of rape, and that's him with my father-in-law. Back in the USSR, USSR dissolves. It's done. It's no longer a country. On January 1st, the Russian SFSR was renamed the Russian Federation. Federation became the legal successor to the state of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was on its last legs in 1991. It fell on Christmas Day, and the first official day of the new Russia is January 1st, 1992. The new state set off on a road to democracy. Well, that's what they said they want to do, become a democratic state and a market economy without any clear conception of how to complete such a transformation in the world's largest country in terms of mass. It is the largest country. Like other former Soviet republics, it entered independence in a state of serious disorder and economic chaos. And that is Boris Yeltsin. Remember Yeltsin? Remember him walking around Washington and the Secret Service going crazy because they couldn't protect him? He's shaking hands with people in Washington, D.C., and they weren't too happy with him doing that because they had to provide protection for him. But anyway, he is the first president of the Russian Federation. Russia faced economic collapse. The new Russian government not only had to deal with the consequences of the mistake in economic policies of Gorbachev, Mikhail Gorbachev during that period, but also had to find a way to transform the entire Russian economy. Boris Yeltsin's government removed price controls on most items in January, which was the first essential step toward creating a market-based economy. His immediate goal was achieved. However, there was a lot of inflation, which became a daily concern for Russians whose salaries and purchasing power declined as prices for even some of the most basic goods, milk, eggs, things like that, continued to rise. The government frequently found itself printing money to fill holes in the budget and prevent failing factories from going bankrupt. There is George H.W. Bush, there is Boris Yeltsin, and the United States has to spin away from the Cold War. How many of you grew up in the Cold War? All of you. How many dove under desks and went like that because you were afraid that the Soviets were going to drop a bomb on you? I did. I didn't want to go under the desk. Mrs. Topper, get under the desk. Why? If they're going to kill me, I was 5 years old. I might as well stand up. Well, they told you to dive under a desk because radiation rises, and also if you put your arms like that, you might be able to protect your head. So all of a sudden, the United States is on a new court. You were laughing. What, another guy who didn't like going under desks?
I remember well.
Remember, did you ever ask why you went under a desk?
No.
I did. I got lectured for it. So anyway, 5 years old, you shouldn't do that. The George H.W. Bush administration was reluctant to embrace the relations of the deep mutual trust and alliance proposed by Yeltsin, according to declassified documents published in 2023 by the National Security Archive. The Bush administration's cautious management of the U.S.-Soviet relations at the end of the Soviet Union in 1991 had focused primarily on command and control of the remaining Soviet nuclear weapons that were scattered over 15 republics, plus encouragement of radical reforms in Russia without much in the way of U.S. economic aid. Goodbye, USSR. Hello, Russia. Russia needed to remake itself into a new national state following the disintegration of the Soviet Union. Just think this happened in your lifetime. This happened in your lifetime. This is history you witnessed on a daily basis. That included unraveling the Soviets' commitment to the Cold War with the United States. It's my wife. She's singing at a Bill Clinton fundraiser. She was the only entertainer there that night at the Bill Clinton fundraiser over at the Rye Town Hilton over in Rye. And anyway, the presidential campaign. My background's radio, basically radio, with some TV, with some newspapers. 1980, I was on the campaign trail. I interviewed Ronald Reagan. I interviewed Ted Kennedy. Went to the Democratic National Convention at Madison Square Garden. By 1992, I was totally jaded of talking to politicians. You hear the same thing in one ear, out the other ear. But it was a presidential campaign in 1992, and there she is singing. Senator Sam Nunn of Georgia joked to Time magazine in January that Bill Clinton was the only politician to be a rising star in 3 decades. The 45-year-old former Arkansas Governor Clinton, who doesn't live too far from here in Chappaqua, started the campaign as the most organized and well-funded of all the Democratic candidates. Clinton considered running as far back as 1988, but at the last minute decided to forego a presidential bid until 1992. He easily defeated all of the other Democratic candidates, and he faced these charges of being a draft dodger. You know, he didn't go into the Vietnam War, so he was a draft dodger. And George H.W. Bush flew missions during World War II for the Air Force. And there were all these rumored affairs with women, Paula Jones and Gennifer Flowers. I'm gonna get off the topic here for a second. I met Gennifer Flowers in New Orleans. She took over a place in New Orleans, a bar called Bogies, and I knew the woman who owned Bogies. Her name was Marita Thompson, and she was Humphrey Bogart's mistress for about 20 years, while he was married to Lauren Bacall. Hopefully the Bogart estate's not listening to me. Yeah. But anyway, so she introduced us to Gennifer Flowers. And remember Helen Kane? Anybody ever hear of Helen Kane? Well, the cartoon character Betty Boop, Boop Boopy Doop, was based on Helen Cade in some ways. And that was Jennifer Flowers' whole nightclub act. All these double entendres, singing like Betty Boop. That was her whole thing. But anyway, she was one of the women who accused Bill Clinton of having an affair with them. He dealt with the infidelity issue on national TV, if you remember the 60 Minutes interview, and he said, yeah, I've caused some pain in my marriage. Although he said, yeah, I smoked pot, I smoked dope in college. Anybody here who didn't smoke any pot in college? Oh, a few. That means the rest of you did. Who did it? I mean, who did it in college? Particularly when he went to school in the 1960s. Well, he was born in 1946, so he was in school from, say, 1964, and then he went to Oxford. Throughout the 1960s, he's in school, and yeah, that was tune in, turn on, drop out, the whole thing in those days with Timothy Leary. Anyway, he said that he smoked pot as a college student, but didn't inhale. Didn't inhale. Yeah, and then his critics said, what's he talking about? What's he talking about? Oh, I never did that. I heard about that. So this is me at the George H.W. Bush Presidential Library. Your taxpayers, tax dollars at work. The State Department sent me there to speak at the George Bush Library in front of 16 foreign nationals, if you count a Canadian as a foreign national, which I really don't. But 3 Turks, 3 Venezuelans, 3 Nigerians, 3 Indonesians, 3 Russians, plus the Canadian, and 4 Americans. And I had to talk about the politics and sports business at the Bush Presidential Library. And if you're really interested, look me up on YouTube, type in the Bush Library, and you'll see the whole talk, which was about 90 minutes long. The incumbent President George H.W. Bush ran a lackluster campaign that failed to convert his great success in foreign affairs. After all, the Soviet Union fell, so did most of Eastern Europe while he was president, into a convincing argument to re-elect him. And he gets killed in his presidential bid for re-election with this phrase that was written by Peggy Noonan. Read my lips. No new taxes. Remember that one? Yeah. Read my lips, no new taxes. I think if he could, he would have fired Peggy Noonan on the spot after she convinced him to say that. It was a phrase spoken by the presidential candidate in 1988, George H.W. Bush, at the Republican convention, as he accepted the nomination on August the 18th. Written by speechwriter Peggy Noonan, who I think is still with the Wall Street Journal at this point. The line was the most prominent soundbite from his speech, and it would come back to bite him again and again and again over the next 4 years. It would haunt Bush. Republican diehards never forgave Bush for breaking his 1988 promise not to raise taxes. He had no choice. There was a recession. The economy wasn't all that good at that point, and he raised taxes. Middle-class Americans, moreover, had grown increasingly upset over Bush's refusal to act on the economic recession that had settled upon the nation. Then there was this guy, Ross Perot. He all of a sudden decides he's going to enter the race, and he does that in the most unconventional way. He goes on Larry King's show. Now, I don't have too much respect for Larry King, and there are many reasons why, because we crossed paths many times in the 1980s, 1990s. But I will give Larry King credit for this. He knew his limitations. He knew he wasn't too bright. So when he did his shows, and my friends Chris Castleberry and Todd Castleberry were his producers on the radio show, he never asked any questions. He would have, as they call in the old neighborhood in Brooklyn, where he grew up, Larry Ziegler, he was a yenter. That's all he was. But he was very effective at doing that as a journalist, because he never came prepared. in Duke Z-Bar's bar most of the night. They got him over the Mutual over on the other side of the Potomac on Jefferson Davis Highway, Crystal City. And, but he never did anything, but he was quite good at it because he'll talk to somebody and then you could call in, perhaps our caller from Houston, hello, maybe you can ask a question. And he was brilliant at that. He was absolutely brilliant. Didn't know what he was doing. That's why he never asked any questions, except for Sinatra. That was his big person. But anyway, Ross Perot goes on his show. Ross Perot followed the populist model that was set down by William Jennings Bryan back in 1896 and 1900, 1908. Like Bryan, Perot reached out to working class and middle class Americans who felt ignored by political establishments within the two parties. And there he is. There's Larry King. By the way, you know Larry King was married to 8 times to 7 different women. Did you know that? No. I saw him all the time. What did he have? I'm trying to figure out what was the attraction besides money later on.
He must have said something.
Yeah.
Looks like his name is Don Quixote.
He must have a good mind.
Well, you know, he made it that far with no talent.
Maybe he was good in bed.
Zero. Maybe he was good in bed. Maybe he was. So anyway, so there's Ross Perot and there's Larry, and he announces his candidacy on the TV chat show. It is a chat show. That's all Larry did was chat. CNN's Larry King Live. He had a host who was never known to ask any sort of tough question, or any question for that matter. When Perot announced his candidacy on Larry King Live, he said he'd run only if volunteers in all 50 states campaigned and got enough signatures to place him on the ballot, bypassing the conventional nominating procedure altogether. He called on individual voters to stand up and be counted. He said that he was going to finance his own campaign, which he did. $63.5 million he spent, which today would be about $139 million. His United We Stand citizens group promised a White House dedicated to patriotism, candor, honesty, and a balanced budget. Dissatisfied voters of all stripes flocked to his call, creating one of the most powerful third-party movements in American history. Actually, I should say modern American history, because you had as many as 4 parties in the 19th century putting up candidates. So that should be in modern American history. And there he is, Ross Perot. And he is about ready to campaign until he decides he's not to. In July, some of Perot's past actions, including a private investigation of the Bush family in the late 1980s, circulated in the media, causing frustration for his campaign. Perot blamed the reports on the Republican research team and claimed that he was warned that since he had such a clean record, that they've got to try to redefine you and destroy you. Well, he goes back on Larry King, it's July 16th, and he said, I'm out of here. Goodbye, I'm out of here. Of course, Larry wasn't going to ask him why you're quitting, other than, hey, Russ, why are you leaving? And we'll let the phone callers take care of that. Larry King was not going to ask any penetrating questions about Perot leaving the race, because that was something that Larry King was not capable of doing. On October 1st, I'm back. You missed me? I'm back. Yeah, I missed half of July and all of August and all of September, but it's 2.5 months. You got to remember who I am. And he said, well, you know what? I'm back because I want to talk about my economic plan for America. He hoped to spend more resources using paid advertisements than holding traditional rallies to spread his message. During the last month of campaigning, he left his Dallas, Texas campaign headquarters to appear in the presidential debate and 7 rallies. And there they are. There is Bill Clinton, there is Ross Perot, and there is George H.W. Bush. He probably would have been better off if he did not wear his watch.
Yeah.
Because you might remember what happened during this debate. Oh, by the way, things got so bad for the Women League of Voters trying to herd these cats in the presidential debate, they got out of it. They said, we have had enough, we can't deal with the Democrats, we can't deal with the Republicans, that's it, we've had enough, we're out. The Commission on the Presidential Debates was a bipartisan organization that was formed in 1987 after the Women League of Voters walked away, unable to deal with the two parties. There were 4 debates in 1992 among the 3 major presidential candidates, Clinton, Perot, and Bush, and 1 vice presidential debate. You might remember Stockdale was, remember Stockdale, Admiral Stockdale, who was Ross Perot's running mate, and he's there at the debate, and all of a sudden he's asked a question, and he says, "Why am I here? I don't know." Stockdale. Anyway, so it was Bush, Clinton, and Perot who met the criteria for inclusions in the debates. There's the picture. There it is. George H.W. Bush is bored and he looks at his watch. That is a fatal mistake. That he should have left his watch at home. It's like, we gotta get out of here. Why am I still here? Why? Why? Yeah. The debates were what they were and what they are today. It's a TV show. It's not a debate. I hosted debates on radio. Debates are just nothing but candidates trying to push their message. They don't answer any questions. And, yeah, that's all they do. Anyway, but there was one interesting part of the debate, visually. Bush looked at his watch and seemed to want to get off the stage. Only 10 more minutes of this crap. President Bush, on what he was thinking when he checked his wristwatch on camera in the midst of the 1992 presidential debate with Bill Clinton and Ross Perot. People noticed. Things like, how much are eggs and things like that as well. Bush admitted he didn't know how much a gallon of milk cost after a civilian, I'll get into that. Anybody ever watched the Match Game with Gene Rayburn? Anybody hear of Gene Rayburn? Sure. He was a game show host. Well, he used to host the game shows, and he used to call the people who came in to compete in the show, not the guest stars, civilians. So, anyway, he asked a civilian asked him a question, not a trained journalist. Well, Bettina Gregory was an ABC News correspondent who moderated one of the debates, and she was really, really, really upset that a civilian could ask a question. After all, a civilian is not trained to, like she is, or like maybe me, and I had no training, to ask a question. She complained that average people were allowed to ask questions of the candidate. Unqualified people ask questions. Let me ask you a question. Are you unqualified to ask a question of a politician, yes or no?
No.
You're not unqualified. You're the ones making a decision.
Who's voting for?
And yet, this is the mindset. This is the mindset, New York Times, Washington Post, network TV people. We're better than you. You're just civilians. Except without you, there's no New York Times, there's no Washington Post, there's no ABC, CBS, NBC, or Fox. You are the consumer. And as Cy Sims once said, an educated consumer is the best customer. Cy Sims. Story's a long guy. Clinton wins. He wins. Al Gore's the vice president. Although Perot drew support from both Republicans and Democrats, he probably hurt Bush disproportionately more than Clinton, owing to his harsh attacks against the incumbent and the timing of both his departure and re-entry into the 1992 campaign. Clinton got the electoral votes, 370 to 168, but only 43% of the vote, so he's a minority president. Bush 37. Perot got no electoral votes, but got 19% of the vote, which is an astonishing total for an independent candidate. Why did Clinton win? Simple. It's the economy, stupid. The Clinton strategist, James Carville, I'm sure you've heard of James Carville over the years, came up with the slogan, Clinton kept on message as the United States was hit with a recession in 1992. Rodney King, arrested in 1991, staged trial in 1992. 25-year-old Rodney King was driving on the Los Angeles highway on March 3rd, 1991, when officers chased him on an 8-mile high speed chase, pulled him over for speeding. Although he got out of the car, he resisted arrest and at one point threw the officers off his back. Officers seeking to subdue him fired a stun gun at him and brutally beat him. A nearby resident, a guy by the name of George Holliday. This is when camcorders. When did you get your first camcorder? I got mine roughly in 1989. This is when camcorders became the big thing as opposed to movie cameras because you didn't have to develop the film. It was right there. Anyway, Holliday filmed the encounter with a camcorder and a video played repeatedly on TV. The Los Angeles police chief was a guy named Daryl Gates. He announced that the 4 officers involved would be disciplined for use of excessive force and 3 would face criminal charges. The LAPD, the Los Angeles Police Department, initially charged King with felony evading, but later dropped the charge. On his release, King spoke to reporters from a wheelchair with his injuries evident. A broken right leg in a cast, his face badly cut, swollen, bruises on his body, and a burn area to his chest where he had been jolted by a stun gun. By the way, if you watch local TV, this is perfect for local TV news. Local TV news consists of this: murder, mayhem, sports, entertainment, and weather. This is murder, this is murder, close to murder, but this is definitely mayhem. And if you watch TV and you watch local news, it's now all surveillance, criminal surveillance tapes that are put on the news, and they said, hey, this is it. I was in Washington, D.C. about 15 years ago, watching WRC, Channel 4 in Washington, 23 straight tapes of crimes being committed, 23, which is not, it's not a newscast, but anyway. And there is the frames from Holliday's camera. He described Rodney King, how he knelt, spread his hands out, and slowly tried to move, so not to make any stupid moves, being hit across the face with a billy club and shot. He said he was scared for his life as they drew guns on him. The Los Angeles County District Attorney subsequently charged 4 police officers with assault and the use of excessive force. March 21st, Stacy Kuhn, Ted Griziano, Timothy Wynn, Lawrence Powell pleaded not guilty in the beating of Rodney King. So Tom Bradley, he was the Los Angeles mayor at the time, creates a commission. It's called the Independent Commission on the Los Angeles Police Department, also known as the Christopher Commission in April. It was led by attorney Warren Christopher. It was created to conduct a full and fair examination of the structure and operation of the LAPD, including its recruitment and training practices, internal discipline system, and citizen complaint system. And those are the 4 cops who were charged. Due to the excessive media coverage of the arrest in Los Angeles and across the country, the trial received a change of venue from Los Angeles County to Simi Valley in neighboring Ventura County on November 26th, which happened to be the home of a good number of Los Angeles police officers. That's where they sent the trial. LA cops acquitted in beating, and this is a problem in Los Angeles. On April 29th, the jury acquits 4 officers after 7 days of deliberations on almost all charges. Jurors deadlocked on 1 assault count against Powell. That day, the mayor, Tom Bradley, calls the verdicts senseless. Bradley added, the jury's verdict will never blind the world to what we saw on videotape. News of the jury decision spreads quickly, unrest follows. The first reports of burning and looting stores come up soon after the verdict is announced. Bradley's request to send in the National Guard granted by the California Governor Pete Wilson. Wilson's a Republican, Bradley was a Democrat, so this is bipartisan at this point. The violence includes an attack on the trucker Reginald Denny, who was pulled from his cab at Florence and Normandy Avenues and was beaten. This is what the Los Angeles riots look like. Look like a war zone. Looked exactly like a war zone. On April 30th, looting and fires are reported across LA County. Some business owners formed armed community teams in the absence of a police presence. A dawn to dusk curfew is imposed in large portions of the city of Los Angeles and surrounding county. Well, Rodney King comes out. Remember he says, can't we all get along? Gives a statement, can't we all get along? On May 1st, in an emotional plea to end the violence, King stands before TV cameras and asks, can we all get along? That evening, President George H.W. Bush took to the airwaves to denounce both the senseless deaths of the riots and police brutality that inspired them, and to announce the dispatch of thousands of federal officers to Los Angeles. May 2nd, 6,000 National Guardsmen, bolstered by the addition of 4,000 federal troops and Marines. The disorder had largely been quelled. May 3rd, a citywide curfew is lifted. Mayor Bradley announced that the crisis is over. On May 4th, violence and crime breaks out sporadically. Schools and banks reopened. Los Angeles was back to normal. Another picture of the looting at the LA riots. The toll in the city was massive. During the riots, 2,000 people injured, 12,000 arrested, 63 deaths, up to 3,000 buildings burnt or destroyed, 3,000 businesses were affected as part of the $1 billion, about $2.2 billion in today's dollars, in damages sustained by the city, leaving an estimated 20,000 to 40,000 people out of work. May 11th, the former FBI Director William H. Webster was named to head the investigation into the LAPD's response during the riots. And in late June, the Los Angeles Police Department Chief Daryl Gates stepped down. On August 5th, 3 months after their acquittals in the criminal case, the four policemen are indicted on federal charges of violating King's civil rights. In October, the commission issued a report that criticized both the LAPD and Tom Bradley for being unprepared and slow to handle the response to the riots. It issued a list of recommendations, including redeploying desk officers into community patrols, upgrading the city's communications and information system. Hurricane Andrew. Anybody have relatives in Florida that were impacted by this 32 years ago? This wiped out Homestead, Florida. Absolutely wiped it out. They had some plans to bring the Cleveland Indians baseball team for spring training in the stadium, and they hoped to get people from the Midwest to come to see Cleveland games and maybe have them relocate there when they retire or buy a winter home. Something. That was one of the things that they were trying to do in Homestead. Hurricane Andrew. When it made landfall in South Florida on August 24th, Hurricane Andrew was a Category 5 hurricane. Maximum sustained winds at 165 miles an hour. Minimum central pressure 922 millibars. It struck Dade County during the pre-dawn hours, caused an estimated $26 billion in damage, which would be about $58 billion today. Homestead was the hardest hit community with more than 99% of the mobile homes completely destroyed. This could have been a lot worse. One little tick northward and Miami could have been destroyed. Andrew started as a tropical wave that emerged off of Africa near the Cape Verde Islands on August 14th. By August 16th, thunderstorm activity in the center of circulation emerged, and it officially became a tropical depression 3 about 1,600 miles east-southeast of Barbados. The next day, it became Tropical Storm Andrew. Andrew was moving at 20 miles an hour, which is fast for a hurricane, which prevented any significant strengthening. Wind shear increased due to an upper level low ahead of it. On August 19th, it appeared the storm was on the verge of emerging into a remnant system, which meant that it wasn't going to be anything with anything. Its center of circulation barely intact. It was not going to be a threat. But by the next day, the upper level low imparting shear on Andrews weakened, and the storm slowly began to reorganize. Needless to say, I was never a meteorologist on radio and TV. Craig Allen was on WCBS radio. The storm was well north of the Lesser Antilles, which usually implies a curve out to sea and away from the United States. But here it is, it's bearing down on the Bahamas. But strong high pressure formed directly north of Andrew, pushing it toward the west. On August 22nd, Andrew became a hurricane. Rapid intensification commenced, and on August 23rd, Andrew became a Category 5 with 175-mile-an-hour winds. It made landfall in the Bahamas as a Category 5 hurricane. Hurricane Andrew brought hurricane-force winds, or maximum sustained winds, of 74 miles per hour to 5 districts in the Bahamas over 3 days. The hurricane also produced tropical storm-force winds in 7 districts. Much of northwestern Bahamas was impacted. Estimated that the damage caused by the hurricane, about $384 million in US dollars, $860 million worth of damage. 800 houses destroyed in the Bahamas, 1,700 people left homeless, 5 schools destroyed. Overall, the storm left severe damage to sectors of transport, communications, water, sanitation, agriculture, and fishing. The hurricane caused 4 deaths in the Bahamas. And that is what Homestead, Florida looked like. It was absolutely flat, totally flat. Hurricane Andrew made landfall, first over Elliott Key and then at Fender Point near the city of Homestead, which was 20 miles southwest of Miami. Just a little tick, it would have been right over Miami. It was classified as a Category 4 storm on the Saffir-Simpson hurricane scale, sustained winds 145 miles an hour. More than 1.25 million people in Florida were ordered to evacuate ahead of the storm. Afterwards, more than 250,000 people were temporarily homeless. About 1.3 million people lost power. And that is life after Andrew. And that guy's in his living room. And that's what his living room looked like, or what was left of his living room. As the eye moved onshore in Florida, the convection in the eye wall strengthened due to increased convergence, and hurricane hunters reported a warmer eye wall temperature than 2 hours prior. However, Andrew weakens as it goes over Alligator Alley, which takes you over to Naples, and it crossed southern Florida in 4 hours. It's pretty good. You ever go across Alligator Alley? It might take you 4 hours by car. Anyway, but it gets into the Gulf of Mexico, and it strengthens. Andrew re-intensified over the Gulf of Mexico, reaching 145-mile-an-hour wind on August 25th. As a high-pressure system to the north weakened, a strong mid-latitude trough approached the area from the northwest. This caused the hurricane to decelerate to the northwest. Winds increased, and Andrew approached the Gulf Coast of the United States. August 26th, the cyclone made landfall about 20 miles southwest of Morgan City, Louisiana, with winds of about 115 miles an hour. And that is what it did in Louisiana. Just tore it apart. Just had a hurricane tearing Louisiana apart. After assessing the devastation in Louisiana and Florida, President George Bush initially proposed the $7.1 billion, $16 million today, aid package to provide disaster benefits, small business loans, agricultural recovery, food stamps, and public housing for the victims of Hurricane Andrew. After the House of Representatives appropriate aid to the victims of Hurricane Aniki in Hawaii and Typhoon Omar in Guam. The cost was later increased to $11.1 billion at that point, which would be about $26 billion today. On August 26th, George H.W. Bush toured the devastated areas of Louisiana with Edwin Edwards, the governor. Bush remarked, the destruction from this storm goes beyond anything we have known in recent years. The bill was the most costly disaster aid package in American history, passed by Congress as House Resolution 5620, September 18th, was written into law by Bush, passed into law on September 23rd. State of Florida got $9 million through the disaster relief bill. Hurricane Andrew killed 65 people. Want to go to the mall on opening day? Want to go there?
No.
Bloomington, Minnesota. Bloomington, Minnesota, the former home of the Metropolitan Stadium, the home of the Minnesota Twins and the Minnesota Vikings. Stadium is knocked down. They have all this land. So what do? They build a mall, the biggest mall in the world. On August 11th, the Mall of America opened its doors to the public in Bloomington, Minnesota, just outside of Minneapolis. The concept of the mall was designed by 555 Group, which owned the largest shopping mall in North America, the West Edmonton, Alberta Mall. The Mall of America was constructed on the site of the former Metropolitan Stadium, where the NFL Vikings and Major League Baseball's Twins played. Groundbreaking took place on June 14th, 1989. When the Mall of America opened its doors to the public, the anchor store were Nordstrom's, Macy's, Bloomingdale's, and remember this store called Sears?
Yeah.
Whatever happened to Sears? Actually, I think there are still about 8 or 9 Sears operating. It just closed some Sears over in New Jersey. You know where Sears is doing well? Down in Mexico. It's doing real well. Carlos Slim bought the name. He was going to change the name, but he didn't. So Sears actually prospers in Mexico. There were 330 stores, employed 10,000 workers, 150,000 shoppers. How'd you like to be in a crowd of 150,000 in a mall? Well, that's where you were on the first day, 150,000 people. The mall included Knott's Camp Snoopy, named after Snoopy, Charles Schultz. And you know where Charles Schultz grew up? Twin Cities in Minnesota, Minneapolis, St. Paul, that area. It was the nation's largest indoor amusement park. The mall was designed for shoppers as well as becoming a tourist destination. Here are the 3 leaders. Actually, I interviewed the guy on the right, Brian Mulrooney, one day. Mexico, United States, Canada. On December 17th, the outgoing president at this point, George H.W. Bush, signs the North American Free Trade Agreement. It's also signed by the Canadian Prime Minister, Brian Mulroney, who just recently passed away, and the Mexican President, Carlos Salinas de Gortari, on the same day. The agreement eliminated most trade restrictions and tariffs on trades between the 3 nations. The agreement was signed close to the end of George Bush's term, as his administration wanted to make sure the incoming Clinton administration would not make any drastic changes to the deal. Clinton supported the proposal. Ross Perot didn't. Remember he said that sucking sound you hear? That's the jobs being taken out of America? That was Perot. Slovakia wants out of Czechoslovakia. My grandmother, who I never knew, she passed away before I was born, the year before I was born. She came from Prague. That was where her family came from before immigrating. The declaration on the sovereignty of the Slovak Republic, which was approved by the Slovak National Council on July 17th, ended with the following words. With this declaration, the Slovak National Council declares the sovereignty of the Slovak nation or republic as the basis of a sovereign state of the Slovak nation. Same day, the Czechoslovakian President Václav Havel announced that he was stepping down. Following 2 years of unsuccessful negotiations on the future name and form of Czechoslovakia, the division of the shared state began to take shape. In Brno, on August 26th, the Czech leader Václav Klaus and the Slovakian leader Vladimir Usier confirmed an agreement on the dissolution of the state in writing. In November, the federal legislature voted to divide Czechoslovakia, having drafted separate constitutions, the new countries, the Czech Republic and Slovakia. Czechoslovakia was out of business by December 31st. Well, this is where the current problems in the Middle East really accelerate. Yitzhak Rabin returns as the Israeli Prime Minister, but it doesn't accelerate because he's back. Subsequent things had happened. February 20th, in a nationwide vote by Labor Party members, Yitzhak Rabin regained leadership of the party from Shimon Peres and led the party to victory in the general elections in June. Rabin formed a government with a mandate to pursue peace, one of the key election issues that pivoted the vote in favor of labor. During Rabin's first term as prime minister, he introduced the 1975 interim agreement with Egypt that laid the groundwork for a permanent peace agreement between Israel and Egypt, which was achieved in 1979. I will talk more about the subsequent problem that happened when we get done in the prologue, or the afterwards. The beginning and the end of apartheid, the vote in South Africa. The referendum on ending apartheid was held in South Africa on March 17. The referendum was limited to white voters who were asked whether or not they support the negotiated reforms begun by the state president F.W. de Klerk 2 years earlier, in which he proposed to end the apartheid system, which had been implemented in 1948. The result of the victory was a large victory for the yes side, which opened the door to the possibility of apartheid being lifted. National Hockey League players went on strike, and because of that, I got to see Chuck Berry. Me and a guy named Bob Trainer, all alone. You know how many of you remember Chuck Berry? Nobody remembers Chuck Berry? Go Johnny, go, Johnny be good. Johnny Be Good and Maybelline and all those other songs. Anyway, what he used to do was he'd go on tour, but he would hire a backup band to go with him because he'd pay him $50, he'd make all the money. So he was doing a private show at the Plaza Hotel. And I'm in the next room because I'm covering the NHL strike, which I helped break when it was over. I was one of those who said, hey, the strike's over. But I opened the door and out popped Johnny Be Good, and he invited me and Bob Trainer in, and I got to watch Chuck Berry for an hour and 15 minutes do all of his show, all of his songs, all of it. No particular place to go, and Johnny Be Good. And, anyway, so that's Bob Goodenow, and he was the head of the National Hockey League Players Association. And he calls a strike on April Fool's Day, April 1st. By calling the strike so close to the end of the regular season, the players felt they had the advantage as the majority of the owners' profits came during the playoffs. Two sides came up with a 2-year collective bargaining agreement on April 10th, which allowed the league to conduct its Stanley Cup playoff run with minimal interruption. One of the issues in this strike was who owned the player's face. Did the owners own the player's face, or did the player own his face? Because they were fighting over revenue of hockey cards. I got to do this properly. So I'm at Gallagher's restaurant one day, covering a boxing thing, and Cosell walks in. And we're just having this discussion. There's nobody there, and all of a sudden people are walking in the crescendos, from here to there to there. When they write the history of TV, they're going to write about the 3 C's. Cronkite, Gossett, and Cosell, and not necessarily in that order. Well, Cronkite was out in 1981. He made the mistake of turning 65 years old. I will never do that again. I will never make the mistake of becoming 65 again. In those days, CBS wanted you at 65. There's Howard. Howard goes.
And here's
Howard was,
he was great.
yeah, I mean, Howard and I got along. I was 27 years old, and 28, and we got along great. I don't know why. I've asked his grandkids, they don't know why either. And Carcel, Cosell, I told you about the 3 C's. Carson and Cosell both exited the stage in 1992. Cosell announced his retirement in January. Carson was gone in May, and neither was ever to be seen regularly on TV ever again. Here's Johnny.
Groucho.
And Groucho. Jack Parr quit. And, NBC was interested in Johnny Carson from the Who Do You Trust game show days. And they needed a guest host for a while between the end of Jack Parr's reign, and how many of you remember Jack Parr?
Sure.
Yeah, and Johnny's beginning. So Groucho was one of the guest hosts in those days. On October 1st, 1962, Johnny Carson became the host of the late-night NBC talk program, The Tonight Show. Carson was introduced by 72-year-old Groucho Marx.
Wow.
Joan Crawford was there to plug her autobiography. The aging crooner, Rudy Valley. Do you know Rudy Valley was as big as Sinatra at one time?
Yeah.
At one time, he was. He appeared with a book to sell. Tony Bennett was on the show, and this guy, Melvin Kaminsky. Did you ever hear of this guy, Melvin Kaminsky?
Sure.
I don't know. Did he do anything?
No.
No. This guy, Kaminsky.
He's still alive.
Yeah. They were guests on the 105-minute show. It ran for an hour and 45 minutes, 5 days a week. The series announcer and Carson's sidekick was Ed McMahon, who from the first show on would introduce Carson with "Here's Johnny." Johnny Carson's Tonight Show established the modern format of the late-night talk show. A monologue sprinkled in with rapid-fire series of about 16 to 22 one-liners, sketch comedy, and then guest interviews, performances by musicians and comedians. By the way, in the 1960s, there were 2 people who were on TV who could make or break your career as a comic. One was Carson. You want to guess who the other one was? Right here on our stage,
You kidding me?
Ed Sullivan.
Ed Sullivan.
Ed Sullivan.
On the show you were in.
Yeah, Ed Sullivan. For a stand-up comic, an appearance on the Carson Show could make or break a career. Joe Rivers' big break, February 17th, 1965 Tonight Show gig. Occasionally, now Johnny didn't do this a lot, but occasionally he would have Richard Nixon up. Oh, please call me Dick, because I know him. Ronald Reagan, I interviewed him. Bill Clinton, I interviewed him. I probably would have interviewed Robert F. Kennedy had he lived, and Hubert Humphrey had they lived. But Carson never talked about his political views on the show because he was afraid it might alienate his audience. Carson could make or break a career. This guy, Wayne Cotter, ended up with a pretty good career. He had a show on the Fox network, and he is also on Bill Maher's show. Wayne Cotter, a stand-up comic from the Bronx, Riverdale, spent nearly a decade waiting to get on The Tonight Show. We were talking about that one night with Johnny. Cotter was one of the last comedians to debut with Carson. Johnny called him over to the couch. He said he was shocked. He was absolutely shocked. He said sometimes he'd be on the show and he wouldn't have to do a stand-up. Johnny wanted to talk to him. That was it. He made it. He went on to appear on many shows, including Politically Incorrect with Bill Maher, and ultimately was the host of his own show on the Fox network, Comic Strip Live. How many of you have heard of Elaine Boozler?
Definitely.
Yeah, well, she almost lost her career because of Johnny. She began doing stand-up in the early 1970s after working as a waitress at the Improv Comedy Club in New York City. Her act consisted of jokes about her experiences as a single heterosexual woman and as a comedian and the impossible expectations of both. One such joke was her take on the sexual double standard. Men want you to scream you're the best while swearing you've never done with anybody before. That was one of her jokes. So the Tonight Show books her in 1977, but she's on with Helen Reddy. But she's so good. She's so good, the producers say, hey, you know what? Let's bring her up to the major leagues. Let's get her on when Johnny's there. But they told her, use hacky self-depreciation material. She said, no, I'm going to use my material. Johnny is upset. Afterwards, he reportedly told his comedy booker, I don't ever want to see that waitress on my show again. Karnak the Magnificent. By the mid-1970s, The Tonight Show was the most profitable show on television, making NBC $50 to $60 million a year, about $230 to $280 million today. Carson had no guests on this final episode of The Tonight Show. More than 50 million people tuned in for this finale, and it ended up with Carson sitting on the stool all alone at the center stage, similar to Jack Parr's last show, saying goodbye.
What about Bette Midler?
And, well, yeah, she was, but she wasn't on the last show. She was on the next to last show. Ed McMahon was Carson's sidekick for the entire run of the show. There's Howard Cosell with Muhammad Ali, and before you ask me, they were not close. They had a showbiz presence, an absolute showbiz presence. Howard defended Ali's right to not go into the military service as a conscientious objector. I could do about 6 hours of Cosell stuff, so I'm going to fit that all into about 3 minutes. He was described as arrogant, pompous, vain, intolerant, haughty, self-indulgent, self-aggrandizing, loud, abrasive, condescending, impatient, tempestuous, grating, verbose, and he was egomaniacal. Do you know what he really was? He was totally insecure. He is the most insecure person I ever met in my life. How could you say that about Howard Cosell? Howard Cosell was both the most admired and most hated man on TV in 1974. But that was his problem. He was totally insecure. Most insecure man I ever met. He grew up in Brooklyn. He was born in North Carolina. Earned a law degree from New York University. Passed the bar in 1941. He represented entertainment and sports figures in his law practice. 1953, he became the host of a radio show that featured Little League players questioning Major League Baseball stars. He did a show called Speaking of Sports, and then Speaking of Everything, as well as sports reports and updates for ABC-affiliated radio stations around the country. He was part of the New York Mets 1962 pregame baseball presentations on WABC radio. 3 years later, he says, okay, after he starts, back in 1951, he says, or 54, he says, you know what, I'm going to become a full-time sportscaster with WABC Radio in New York. And there was the war between him and Dick Young. I'm not going to get into all of that stuff because I understood the war. Howard could report immediately, and they had to bang out stories on the typewriter that would not make the their newspapers for hours. And there was a lot of jealousy between Jimmy Cannon and Dick Young and all the rest of these people who were writing for the Times, and the Post, and the Journal American, and all these other newspapers. I'm not going to get into those stories, but I know some of those stories. He did the show, Speaking of Sports, the sportscasts around the country as well. He claimed to tell it like it is. Well, he told it like he thought it was. In April 1967, he was the first to defend Muhammad Ali when the boxer was stripped of his heavyweight title after refusing to be drafted into the army because of his religious beliefs. He voiced approval of the Black Power salutes made by John Carlos, Tommy Smith, 68 Mexico City Summer Olympics. But it was the bluster and the clowning with Muhammad Ali that drew eyeballs to the TV and convinced his boss at ABC, Rowan Arledge, get over there, Rowan Arledge. He was the first guy to be hired as an announcer on ABC Monday Night Football. Why? Because the entertainment division was putting money into this, and the game had to be more than a football game. It had to be entertaining. And there they are, Cosell, Keith Jackson, and Dan DeRue. I was talking to Keith Jackson one day. He only lasted 1 year. He said he's glad he only lasted 1 year because he said his liver would never have held out if he lasted more than that. Arledge had to convince the National Football League commissioner, I'll do it as Howard would, Alvin, Roy, Pete Rozelle, that Monday Night Football had to be entertaining, not a run-of-the-mill Sunday game. Cosell had to be part of it. And Frank Gifford, who was under contract to CBS, recommended Don Meredith as Cosell's perfect foil. For 14 years, Cosell either entertained or aggravated millions of viewers on Monday nights in the fall. That is his grandson. That's Justin. Justin and I are friends. I'm friends with the Cosell family. Anyway, that's and actually Justin's 6'5". He's kind of squinting down. He's 6'5". Anyway, that little monkey today, and Cosell lost his job because he said that, see that little monkey run. That's what he called his grandkids. I checked with all his grandkids. He called them little monkeys. So anyway, that's the little monkey today. During the first half of the September 5th, 1983 Monday night game between the Dallas Cowboys and the Washington Redskins, Cosell's commentary on wide receiver Alvin Garrett included, "That little monkey gets loose, doesn't he?" Well, he referred to Garrett as a little monkey, and that ignited a racial controversy. The Reverend Joseph Lowry, then the president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, denounced Cosell's comment as racist and demanded a public apology. Despite supportive statements by Jesse Jackson, Muhammad Ali, Alvin Garrett, the fallout contributed to Cosell's decision to leave Monday Night Football after the 1983 season, and he continued to call his grandkids little monkeys. I never played the game. I never did. After his wife of 46 years, Mary Edith Abrams Cosell, Emmy died from a heart attack in 1990. He started falling apart. I mean, I spent some time with him, and he was falling apart. He withdrew from the public eye, and his health began to fail. Great piggy bank robbery. Cartoon Network starts in the United States. Ted Turner Broadcasting System, October 1st. The first round of programming that aired on the network consisted of old Warner Brothers, MGM, and Hanna-Barbera cartoons. The first was a Looney Tunes short called The Great Piggy Bank Robbery. Mike Tyson goes to jail. Mike is still around. Don King just had enough with him. So he hired the worst possible attorney to defend him in Indianapolis, Vincent Fuller, who never defended anybody accused of rape before. Former heavyweight boxing champion Mike Tyson came to Indianapolis on July 17, 1991 for the Indiana Black Expo at the invitation of Expo President Charles Williams. He met Miss Rhode Island, Desiree Washington, at a rehearsal for the Miss Black America pageant in Indianapolis. Washington accompanied Tyson back to his hotel room in the early hours, July 19. She said Tyson raped her. Tyson said it was consensual. 3 days later, Washington went to the police, which he had to say resulted in Tyson facing charges of rape and related offenses. I was part of this. Let me tell you one thing about Mike Tyson. I once had to go to, where was it, in New Jersey, Burnsville, because he was arrested for allegedly beating up his wife. I once had to go to Columbia Presbyterian Hospital for a news conference because he tried to kill himself, allegedly. I'm following Mike Tyson on all of this nonsensical stuff. That's what I was doing at the time. And there's Desiree Washington. He was indicted by a grand jury September 1991, faced trial February 10th following a 2-week trial that monopolized the attention of the media across the world. Tyson was found guilty of rape. A month later, the judge, Patricia J. Gifford, sentenced him 10 years in jail, but suspended the last 4 years of his sentence. His boxing career put on hold. Well, we're finally at the end of 1992. Vladimir Putin in Russia. Yeltsin's presidency in Russia lasted until 1999. The Russian-American relationship now is on par with the Cold War years from 46 to 89, very frosty. Russia's story of the war with Ukraine, February 2022. the George Bush Presidential Library, your tax dollars at work, sending me there to talk to foreign nationals. George W. Bush, Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter, and Donald Trump since 1933 are the only incumbent presidents beaten in an election. Lyndon Johnson decided not to run in 1968, and of course Joe Biden now decided not to run. Bill Clinton and George Bush became best buddies. Bill Clinton's surrogate father in the world was George H.W. Bush, believe it or not. George Bush and his son, George W. Bush, who won the 2000 and the 2004 elections, just the second father and son combination to be president, joining John and John Quincy Adams. That is Rodney King. 1993, Stacey Koon, Lawrence Powell sentenced to 30 months apiece to jail for violating Rodney King's civil rights. In April 1994, King was awarded $3.8 million, $8 million today in a civil lawsuit against the city. King drowned in 2012, but his legacy lives on in American culture. The Mall of America seems to be holding up during the age of the malls dying and closing. The mall hosts about 400 events a year, ranging from concerts to celebrity appearances and fashion shows. Each year, 40 million people from around the world visit the mall as it's a tourist destination. Why else would you go to Minneapolis, St. Paul to see 3M and get Scotch tape? That is Florida, Homestead. It took about 5 years to rebuild from Hurricane Andrew afterwards for Homestead. The destruction of the town, including the loss of the Homestead Air Force Base, which had been built to withstand 200-mile-an-hour winds. The base survived and was rebuilt despite efforts to close it. About 63,000 homes in Dade County, which is Miami area, were also destroyed. About 110,000 additional homes suffered significant damage. The large amount of destruction cost to homes was blamed on poor construction. Florida beefed up safety codes as a result. In Louisiana, in the largest swamp in the United States, 182 million fish were killed due to the storm's destruction of their natural habitat. 9.4 million other fish were killed off the coast. The storm damaged corn, soybean, sugar crops, about $200 million in damage, almost $500 million today. Major damage done to the sugar crop. 12 years after the event, the Hurricane Research Division of NOAA reanalyzed data during Hurricane Andrew. As a result, it became known as, or classified as a Category 5 hurricane on the Saffir-Simpson hurricane wind scale. Originally, it was only supposed to be Category 4, but what's the difference? A couple miles an hour with winds. This is not NAFTA. NAFTA produced mixed results. It wasn't all that good for everybody. It wasn't a magic bullet that its proponents had envisioned, nor the devastating blow, you hear that sucking sound, Ross Perot, that its critics predicted. Mexico did experience an increase in its exports. Economic growth during the post-NAFTA period was not impressive for any of the countries involved. The Czech Republic is considered an advanced economy with high standards of living. Machinery, engineering, electronics, automobile manufacturing, and brewing are the major industries, while tourism and agriculture are significant. Slovakia is a developed country with an advanced high-income economy. The country maintains a combination of market economy. Oh, listen to what they have in Slovakia. They have comprehensive social security system. They provide their citizens with universal health care, free education, and one of the world's longest paid parental leaves.
Wow.
Every time I watch, I do not watch presidential debates. I learned that in college. You're better off listening because you can hear it. But I would like to ask any candidate, why does Slovakia have all this, and why can't the United States have this?
Because we won't pay taxes here.
Why?
And the two countries have a good relationship.
Yeah.
Rabin and Clinton and Yasser Arafat.
Wow.
On the evening of November 4th, 1995, Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated by Yigal Amar, a law student and a right-wing extremist who opposed the signing of the Oslo Accords. On September 13, 1993, Rabin and the Palestinian Liberation Organization negotiated Mahmoud Abbas signed a declaration of principles on interim self-government arrangements commonly referred to as the Oslo Accord at the White House. Israel accepted the PLO as the representative of the Palestinians, and the PLO renounced terrorism and recognized Israel's right to exist in peace. The assassination would change Middle East history. Nelson Mandela, after his prison release in 1990, became the head of the anti-apartheid movement and helped negotiating its end in South Africa. In 1994, he became the first black president of South Africa after being elected in the first multiracial elections. CNN, Turner Broadcasting, Cartoon Network. In August 2024, in yet another cost-cutting initiative, David Zaslav, Warner Brothers Discovery, announced that it would be shutting down the Cartoon Network's website. Cartoons would be available on the WBD's Max streaming service. Cable networks such as the Cartoon Network have been losing revenue with a loss in carriage fees from cord cutters, former subscribers, resulting in a massive drop in revenue and in ratings. The National Hockey League players and owners have had numerous labor disputes. 1994-95, there was a lockout, cut the games down to 48 per team. 2004-2005, the entire season was wiped out. The National Hockey League's Board of Governors ratified a new collective bargaining agreement on January 9th, 2013. NFL and HLPA members ratified the deal 3 days later. The 2012-2013 season started on January 19th and ended on April 28th. There's Johnny. The Tonight Show still airs in the United States on Nintendo TV.
Right.
NBC erased all of Johnny's shows from 1962 to 1967. I don't know, they probably needed it for the Gong Show, or no, Gong Show came later, Hollywood Squares. Thinking they weren't worth saving. Only 33 complete episodes of Johnny Carson's Tonight Show that originally aired prior to May 1st, 1972 are known to exist.
Wow.
The program archive after that is virtually complete from 73 to 92. Carson died 2005 at the age of 79. Cosell, he was a once-in-a-lifetime TV character. There is no successor to Carson, to Carson also. No successor to Carson. No successor to Cronkite. No successor to Howard. He told it like it was, so he said. It's hard for me to believe that he's gone 29 years. I mean, because I knew the guy rather well. I mean, it's still hard for me to fathom that he's gone 29 years. And what's even harder to fathom was that he would be, at this point, 106 years old. I can't believe that.
That's right.
That's the Canterbury Hotel in Indianapolis. I made sure when I was in Indianapolis to take a picture of that place. Mike Tyson would return to boxing, recapture the heavyweight title in 1996. Tyson's been some sort of a celebrity since the end of his boxing career. I don't get it.
Wow.
But he's still out there.
He represents
And
a lot.
he's still doing whatever he's doing out there. Anyway, any questions, any comments? It's your turn to talk. I've talked enough.
Thank you.
Anybody have anything to say about 1992?
I would say Clinton took the picture